Jivatma, the individual soul, and Paramatma, Supreme Soul. Through prayer, all individual souls can be united to the Supreme Soul. Every house has a connection for gas, and gas can be obtained from the main storage tank of the gas company. Apply to the company, and it will arrange for your supply of gas, and your house will be lighted. In some spiritual consciousness has already been awakened, but they have special marks. They do not enjoy hearing or talking about anything but God. They are like the Chatak, which prays for rainwater through the seven oceans, the Ganges, the Jamuna, and the rivers near it are all filled with water. It won't drink anything but rainwater, even though its throat is burning with thirst. And the master wanted to hear a few songs. Ramlal and a Brahmin official of the temple garden sang, "Dwell, O Lord, O lover of Bhakti, and your dark and my devotion unto thee will be thy Radha, daily love." Lighting the world with his loveliness, Krishna, the Dark One, appears. His dazzling yellow robe outgleams even the lightning's glare. A wreath of wildflowers interwoven gently swings from his youthful breast and softly kisses his feet. See, there he stands, the Lord of life, the moon of Nanda's line, outshining all the moons in heaven, and with the splendor of his rays, flooding the Jamuna's bank. He stands there, stealing the maidens' hearts. He lures them from hearth and home. Krishna enters my own heart's shrine with his flute note, and with his flute note steals away my wisdom, life, and soul. To whom shall Ganga Narayana pour out his tale of woe? Ah, friend, you might have understood had you but gone to the Jamuna's bank to fill your water jar.
All right. Om Danur Grihitva Upanishadam Mahastram Sharam Hupasanashita Sanjayita Ayamya Tad Bhavakatena Chetasa Laksham Tadevaksharam Somya Vidhi. Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. Taking as bow that mighty weapon furnished by the Upanishads and other non-dual teachings, fasten to it the arrow of mind, made sharpened by thoughts on reality alone. Then, pulling full strength, O student, release and penetrate the mark, that imperishable Brahman. Om Shravanayapi Buhu Biryo Nalabhyaha Shinvato Pi Bahavo Yamna Vidyuhu Ascharyo Gyata Kushalo Shalabdaha Ascharya Vakta Kusalo Nushishtaha. Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. Many there are who have never heard of the great self within. Others, though they hear of it, fail to comprehend it. Fortunate is the one who hears of it. Wonderful is the one who speaks of it. But extremely blessed is that one who, having heard of it from the lips of an illumined preceptor, is able to realize it here and now, in this very life. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Sahana. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karvavahai Tejasvi Navaditamastu Ma Vidveshavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman, that reality, protect us. May Brahman sustain us. May Brahman illumine our thinking process. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om. Welcome everyone this morning to our class in the Shvetashvatara Upanishad. We have taken a 1-week break while we were on retreat last week, a 3-day retreat at the Wind River on Zen Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta. And now we return to the Advaita Vedanta because Vedanta means Upanishads. Although those Upanishads that we're studying, 108 of them, particularly 11 of them that Sri Shankaracharya commented on in his brief 32-year-old life, are definitely non-dual, but they have in it many teachings that are also of a qualified non-dual level and of a dual level. So this means that dualism, qualified non-dualism, and non-dualism are 3 steps or 3 stages, as Vivekananda called it, to the highest reality. And so the Upanishads comes down from the non-dual level to give us examples and metaphors and teachings and stories. Even the Katha Upanishad is one great story about Nachiketa's meeting the Lord of Death, Yama, and all that went on between them in that conversation. So we find actually that non-dualism really can't be spoken of. It can be spoken of rather, but it can't be actually spoken about because it is already beyond words and beyond descriptions, beyond ideas and concepts. Ideas and concepts were all that was here listed on this chart we left off with on the last class 2 weeks ago. And this was 3 levels of sankalpa and vikalpa, and we learned by that term in Sanskrit that sankalpa means mental projection. Vikalpa means about the same thing, only mental connection out of desire. So everything here in this universe is a manifestation of Brahman through the Word, through the cosmic mind of God, down into the realms of gods and goddesses and celestials and ancestors and human beings, animals and insects, everything right on down to the plant world. We see nothing but a reflection of God, or as once Sri Ramakrishna put it so nicely, when a student asked, how is it that Brahman can pervade everything and be everywhere and in everything, but yet not be a thing? And he asked thank you. He explained by reflection, adhyasa, or sometimes we call it vivarta. So he said, just look at this morning, all of the dewdrops, they're all sparkling with sunlight. Just like that, Brahman shines in all things. It's a beautiful way of explaining how God is in everything, but it's not a thing. So this reflective power of dew and reflective power in the insect, in the plant, in the animal, in mankind, and in all the other worlds inside of you, consisting of your ancestors, your gods and goddesses, the celestials, even right on up to the Trinity, manifests this light of Brahman from very weak to very middling to very intense. And we'll talk a little bit about that today in terms of King Svota's 3 great pillars that he sunk down into relativity so that he could project, Sankalpa style, a great world for himself. But first, let me remind you where we are in the scripture. the Portland Sangha, and by the way, welcome to the live streaming audience who I know are from Hawaii and mainland, East Coast, and maybe even from India, looking in upon us, and all of our members here in the Portland Ashram welcome you. We were on chapter 5 with the Portland Sangha, and we had reached Sloka 7. And Sloka 7 says, subtle as the point of a gourd, and pure, effulgent and infinite like the sun. It alone is seen assuming, as another, the size of a thumb on account of the finiteness of the heart in which it appears, and associating itself with ego and sankalpa on account of the limitations of the intellect. So intellect is less limited at the level of the Trinity, but as it trickles down, you might say, into various forms, from the causal to the subtle to the gross bodies of everything, then this intellect becomes more and more stunted, as it were. The same process that's undergone by great beings, though, they manage to keep and bring with them a great amount of light. That's what the difference between the seers and saints and ordinary beings are, is that somehow coming out of the word Om and developing an ego body is one of the subtlest and one of the first bodies, as is said here. That Brahman associates itself with ego and then with sankalpa, so it has to take on some sort of sense of separateness in order to get out of the extract itself out of the ocean of Brahman as a totality and assume bodies, assume sheaths, as we say in Vedanta, and also occupy different akashas, the akasha of causal space, subtle space, and gross space. So this is all very well mapped out in the cosmology of India, which you will see by a series of charts that will be given to you in the course of today's class. So this intellect, some beings are able to keep a great amount of it with them as they come down, as if they don't forget God. But notice around you how many people have forgotten God, or don't care about God, or believe God doesn't exist. And of course, that word God is a fairly loaded term for us in this particular culture, so we have to look to other words like Brahman or Allah or Tathagata. Almighty Father is fine too, or the great Divine Mother of the universe is also another beautiful way of expressing that divine reality through form. In other words, God exists with form, and beyond both form and formlessness too, as Ramakrishna often said to us, so that we would keep that intellect open, that mind open in a universal way, in a Catholic way. The word Catholic means universal in its original rendering. So we want that universal mind. And so some of these beings coming down into this levels of gross consciousness, that is, where ideas have become solidified. The pillow you're sitting on is just a solid version of your thought, which is there in your dream state and was also there stored in the causal state in a formless form back when everything disappears in deep sleep, in death, in meditation, or in samadhi. Those are 4 ways in which we realize the formless essence of ourselves. 4 opportunities, you might say, to identify with the Absolute, which is nameless and formless. And then coming out, if you have brought a lot of your intellect with you, your intelligence that is, then you may come only down so far as the heart, as Sri Ramakrishna said, and use the heart's intellect. That's why he says here, as infinite as the sun, it alone is seen assuming as another the size of a thumb on account of the finiteness of the heart in which it appears. So they say that Atman, if you want to locate it or correspond it to the physical chakra, the physical heart and the chakra there, is like the size of a thumb, just sometimes they say 3 fingers or 4 fingers away from the breastbone. So there's a place there where you meditate to understand the subtle nature of things, and then finally even the causal nature of things. Many people understand the subtle, but they don't understand the causal yet, because that's where everything goes into form, as is instanced by the beautiful word, causal or causation or karma. the original formless form that is called unmanifested prakriti, or where all of nature is held in abeyance in its subtle, there again we're missing words, but in its causal form. So out of that comes everything, as we had in an earlier sloka. Everything pours out of that unmanifested prakriti, and that's a good concept or a good truism to keep with you, because then you keep God sacrosanct. You don't make it a cause for anything. It doesn't create, preserve, or destroy. Its Trinity does that. It doesn't break into worlds and names and forms. The Word does that. The Word facilitates that. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God, are three different levels. So in the beginning, we know there is no beginning. That's the ultimate truth. Ajati, there's no birth, there's no death for anything. It's all one homogeneous mass of pure conscious awareness that exists at all times, beyond time. So in the beginning is sort of a dichotomous statement. You have to see, in the beginning, that means back there in Genesis, back there in the Word. And then when it was with God, it means God and the Word are two separate things. God is standing back, pure, perfect, motionless, stable, and its Word is emanating out all this light of intelligence. And that light of intelligence is forming worlds. All the way down here to where the chair you're sitting at, the house you're living in, and the building you're in, and the city you're in, and so forth, is all made of your own ideas, all made of intelligence. On a gross level, it's made of atomic particles, but you have to go beyond the nanometer measurement. If you go beyond the nanometer measurement outward, you find atomic particles, subatomic particles vibrating at a billionth of a second. But if you squeeze through that disappearance of the atomic particle into the pranic particle going inward, then you begin to find all the kingdoms of heaven within you. So it's a different trajectory that the spiritual person is on than the materialist is on. And it is a two-way street. Om, so he has these two apertures, one going in and one going out. So beings come into Om, they dissolve themselves, and then a vibration coming out of Om takes on various spheres and bodies in a gradated way. So these words here in this sloka, chapter 5, sloka 7, are very, very pregnant with meaning on many, many different levels. You have to spend time contemplating them and unwrapping them. That's called manana. And then you get to the nididhyasana. Once you know about the concepts and you're familiar with them, then all of a sudden they open up to you inside and you can see them. Not with these eyes. No one has ever seen God. One of Christ's apostles said, no one has ever seen God with these eyes. So an eye has to become single. And then you begin to develop this ability of inward seeing. And you can see all the names, all the worlds of name and form and time and space disappearing back into the Word. And as the Vedanta and Yoga both say, find that Word inside of you, inside of yourself. Nothing is outside then in that case. It's all of the light. And as Zoroaster said, there's nothing worth knowing that is not of the light. So you have to, everything worth knowing is of the light, in other words. So that light is within you. Now, we know that the limitations of the intellect make that light seem like a sun's light or a moon's light, a physical light. But the millions of suns in the night sky, called stars, are all a conglomerate of this light of consciousness which is further within. Those might as well be the particles of intelligence, represent the particles of intelligence that gather by the minis in a subtler space than physical space. They gather there in the land of Gyanakasha. 3 men walked into a Gyanakasha, as they say. As the beginning of the Vedic joke, you see. So that was Buddha and others. Vashishta probably, who gave us this wonderful chart. So that Gyanakasha is a realm of pure intelligence, pure shining light, just short of Om. As Vivekananda said, this light of the formless Brahman, as it comes through the word, the first compound would be intelligence. Intelligence is a compound, no doubt, but it's the first compound of all. And as it comes out, it has this power to solidify, to liquefy, to radiate, to pervade. So there you get ether, air, fire, water, and earth finally, and it reaches its furthest out, which is called the physical earth. So some of the precious Dharma teachings that help us clarify where we are, who we are, why we came here, what is it that is here. Is it just physical objects, or is it actually Brahman? Because the great seers come to find out that all this is Brahman. But you wouldn't call Brahman a dewdrop. See, you'd have to say that light shining there in the dewdrop is the sun's light. So everything shining here in the dewdrops of the many human beings and plants and animals and so forth is that light of Brahman, no doubt. But it's been limited by the intellect or by the particular sheath that it is radiating through. Light shines better off of a mirror than a lake, and better off of a lake, off of a leaf than off a lake than a leaf, and better off of a leaf than a rock. So you see, in all, that's 4 levels of accessibility and emanation power of a rock and a leaf and a lake and a mirror. The mirror being best of all would be that clean, clear intelligence that the seer maintains while he's in a body. So we looked at this chart because the end of the sloka says sankalpa, and we looked at some of the things we're going to have to stay away from, these mental modes. And you see there are such things as hope and coveting and accumulating and even imagining. Projecting is a good word for sankalpa. We often project fantasies from our own mind, and we often project overlays or false superimpositions onto things which aren't really there. That's where you get that snake and a rope analogy that's so famous in Vedanta, that you mistake one night a snake for a rope and you jump in fear, but all that fear and in the misconception that you are laboring under is all unfounded. And you see when the snake is really the snake. So when you see all of this really as Brahman, all of the projections you've been putting over it, like trees and houses and people and relationships and cars and money, will go away and become nothing but Brahman. Go away means we'll stop flummoxing you, we'll stop confusing you, we'll stop causing suffering. And those very things then can cause you bliss, not pleasure, because pleasure is another kind of pain. So what you want is beyond pain and pleasure. You want to get to that contentment, that peace that passes all understanding, and then finally this pure, unalloyed, uninterrupted bliss, which they call by the name Ananda. It has no opposite, like joy and sorrow and so forth. It's uninterrupted and unalloyed. It's pure and it's constant. And once you taste it, you want to live in it at all times. So we don't need to go through this chart again because we went through it thoroughly 2 weeks ago, but I want to show you another Sankalpa chart that I remembered was in there in the collection of some 250 charts that have been created by SRV and its founder and its artistic director, spiritual director, called King Svota's Sankalpa City. And the live streaming can see it probably there on the screen now. For the rest of you, you might be able to, if you have good eyes, see it across the room. But in other words, I'll go through it very quickly for you. But the idea here is drawn from a story. King Svota was a great master of Sankalpa. So here's something to understand, is that Sankalpa, as related to Arjuna by Sri Krishna in the Gita, is a positive evil. That's a kind of an interesting term, a positive evil. It could mean an outright evil, or it could be a mixed bag, as they say. The idea there is that in Lord Vashishta's idea is that there's Mayic Sankalpa and then there's Atmic Sankalpa, or you could call it Leela Sankalpa. There's a Sankalpa that happens by sport, by the soul's desire to sport, and that sport can only be attained really through higher wisdom. by knowing who's doing the projecting and where the projecting is coming from and how to take it back. You see, they come at you, you say, take that back. You see, okay, I take it back. You see, so none of us are very good at taking it back, so that we can forgive what happens out there in this projection that we're all involved in. So come to know Lord Shiva, and you'll develop that power, because Shiva is in you like Vishnu and Brahma. So come to know Shiva, and you can be able to take it back like you do every night anyway in deep sleep. You take the whole universe back that you projected. So with that ability, you can withdraw all of this. So King Sveta was very proficient at projecting a universe in space and time, maintaining it so he could enter into it and sport there, and then withdrawing it because he knew ultimately that it was unreal. That was a projection of his own mind. So that's a great ability. Most people would never think that, or even think that their individual mind had that much power. But the individual mind, when it awakens spiritually, is none other than Brahman. We have to remember that. That ordinary mind turns to original mind. That individual self turns to indivisible self. So we have to know that pure mind is God, or Buddha mind is God. That's, sometimes they call it no mind. However you describe it, it falls back and rests in its own innate purity. And that purity, of course, is formless. So at that point it has a choice. It can project itself into the worlds of name and form. It would usually do that for the purposes of helping beings wake up. Their suffering isn't really real. Their projection of the world and who they think they are is not really real. Their ego is not really real. Remember, it just associates itself with the ego. So you're not seeing that which associates, you're seeing the association itself. So if you stand back and see that one who is the master of all projection, which is the original mind, then you can withdraw as efficiently as you project. That's a master and a past master that can do that. You have your beings that came back again and again. You see, like Lord Vashishta, the 10 mind-born sons, and Swami Vivekananda coming every so often, and Dalai Lama coming 13 or 14 times in his series of lifetimes in Tibet. So we have that idea of projection in wisdom. Should a man be reborn? I certainly hope he will not, Vivekananda said, not unless he can do so in full consciousness. So when you have that kind of mastery, your sankalpa is lila sankalpa, or atmic sankalpa. If you don't have that kind of projection and you're completely lost in your own projection, that's mayic sankalpa. And there are, of course, many millions, billions of souls who are unaware of it all being a mental projection in the first place. They think that it's real. That's why Vedanta comes along and its first axiom is God is real. The world is not real. So that they get you to switch that trajectory, turn the whole thing on its ears, make a 2% shift, as we say, and begin to see all of this as a grand mental projection from the Trinity all the way down through the gods and goddesses, ancestors, humans, and so forth. Anywhere that you see a great mind, or any kind of mind, you know that that sankalpa process is going on, therefore the game is afoot, therefore Maya is operating. Or Mara, as Buddha found it under the Bo tree, or samsara, as he later called. Mental projection, adhyasa, false superimposition, vivarta, there are a lot of words for it that we don't have any for in English because we think that this is it when we're born. We're born in that state of root ignorance that sees all of this as real. The five senses, the five elements being, and maybe a little brain mixed in, being all of that part of the reality, but we don't see. That's why science is always talking about relativity and never once mentions reality. They don't have an answer for you. The kingdoms of heaven within, to them, might as well be non-existent, or some fine flight of philosophy that Christ was engaging in to impress his apostles or something. But he had actually sat in the wilderness for 40 days, and as Muhammad did and Buddha did. 40 days seems to be about the time which, if you're in a desert, a mountain, or in a forest or under a tree, will be the amount of time it'll take you to see through this great magical projection, this great sankalpa of the Trinity. So that when you finally meditate and reach the Trinity and they stand forth and say, "Who goes there? You shall not pass." You say, "I shall pass because I'm done with this creation and I want to see the Almighty Father. I want to merge with the Almighty Father. I'm world weary. I've seen enough of this marvelous projection." Those who haven't, they're welcome under their own auspices to continue on in the cycles of samsara. But they have to deal with birth, life, and death. And they also risk never knowing what eternal life is, as Christ wanted the apostles to know. So in the case of King Sveta, there's this beautiful story in Vasishta's Yoga, told by Vasishta. As usually that's story inside of story inside of story that you get through chapters, and then you finally realize when you reach the end of the story that it brings everything back to full cycle, because it was a story that started 3-4 chapters ago, 100 pages back, and the whole thing was unwrapping inside of it. It's very Mayic in itself, the way it cycles and cycles inside of stories. But so many great teachings. Like I said, you can come down to a default zone called Mahamaya. You don't have to go down to Maya. You can come down to a default zone called Mahamaya. That's Mother in her wisdom. And that's where all of these beings, you might have noticed, hang out, as they say. They want to abide there in that place of highest wisdom where light is shining through words and through ideas, and they can apply those words and ideas to the very physical objects and see the truth. It's the secret of walking around with that armed with that kind of insight. If thine eye be single, you might say. They're constantly going up and down from the heart chakra to the third eye chakra and never quite merging in the final chakra. And coming back down and doing this kind of dance. Sri Ramakrishna said that, from the heart to the third eye, back to the heart. These realized beings are coming up and down these chakras. So sometime you might see them, they seem very loving. Other times you see them, they might seem very distant. You think, oh, he's kind of aloof today, or callous. You see, oh, he's so beautiful one day. You see, he's laughing and dancing. But actually, they're just in a different state of their consciousness, depending on where they want to be or where Mother's wisdom finds them that day. And that's part of knowing an illumined soul and its moods, like Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. Well, the story inside of the story here is Vasishta's telling Ram, of course, the young teenage Ram, about Maya, because that's what's troubling Ram, is this little tiny bit of Maya that's holding back in his mind. In his case, suffering is real. He's thinking the suffering he saw outside the palace when he went on pilgrimage with his brothers and half-brothers is real. Just like Buddha, when he went out, Shakyamuni went out of his castle thousands of years later with his father, saw the 4 signs and saw suffering everywhere. So they fell into this little tiny bit of Maya, their beautiful sattvic minds, that caused them to begin to brood on this suffering that's going on. So as Vasishta counsels Ram in a set of stories that is going to lift him out of that idea that everything is unreal, even suffering and evil, nothing is real but Brahman, therefore posit yourself in Brahman only. See nothing but Brahman. If you see someone suffering, say, oh, there's Brahman going through suffering. See, there's Latu sitting there with his arm and his head in his hand, you see, as Sri Ramakrishna used to say about one of his disciples. So everything is just Brahman taking on form. Assuming form, that is, not identifying with form in their case. And in other cases, yes, identifying completely with the form as if there were no place to be projected from, like the form had no source. Go figure. How would you make a conclusion like that? I certainly can't tell you. But this teaching to Sri Ram took the form of the story of King Dasara, or of Dasara, the great devotee known by all in so many of all the worlds. He went to the forest and he was being bothered in his meditations. So he said, well, there's a good place up there in the tree on that branch. I should be able to meditate up there better. Nobody will bother me. So he tried to climb up there, but his body was too heavy to sit on a branch. His balance might have been pretty good, but his body was just too heavy. So he came down and he struck on a plan, and he lit a fire, gathered wood, lit a fire, and started cutting off pieces of his body and throwing them into fire and making them an offering to Agni, the fire god. So Agni got really freaked out, you see, because this great illumined seer was cutting off pieces of his body and offering to him. So he came out of the fire and he said, Dasara, what are you doing? And Dasara says, well, I think I was going to lighten my body so that I could meditate better up in the tree. See? And so Agni said, well, you know, you don't do that. Here, take back all these body parts. You see, we'll melt them back on you. See? The power of God, fire god has lots of power. And I'll make your body light. You'll be able to levitate, as it were. And so, where do you want to meditate? So King Dasara pointed to this tree and this branch and this little twig on the end of a branch. He said, I want to meditate on the end of that twig. So presto changeo. See, he was able to become light and sit on there. So when he meditated, then a forest goddess came to him with a child that had, unbeknownst to him, been created by her, by her having just sight of him. Mind-born child, they're called. And so he said, you have to raise this boy now. I've raised him as far as I can. So Dasara had to come down out of the tree and raise this boy. So he started telling this boy the story of King Sveta. So here's story inside of story inside of story takes us to King Sveta's marvelous ability to project worlds of name and form and time and space as if real. Now, you can see here, and this is all in association with Sloka 7 of chapter 5 in your Shvetashvatara Upanishad, how Sankalpa works. You can see King Sveta's Sankalpa city there. By the way, as you can see, maybe you can't see, but the actual word Sveta means that which rises out of itself. So he's named very appropriately. Not only does his body arise out of his self, like our bodies arise out of our self, but everything in our Sankalpa also comes out of us, of course. Once the consciousness has taken on a form, call it the Anandamaya Kosha, if you will, then from there on the ego has control over the whole business, and they'll start projecting mind, intelligence, body, senses, body, worlds. All of that will begin to happen in a kind of sankalpic way as a projection. And if you get, say, 7 or 8 billion people doing that, then you have a world. And it's getting more populated all the time because more people want to do it. And less people want to dissolve it. They want to sustain it. Everyone likes Vishnu, but they stay away from Shiva until they want it dissolved. So in this grand mass collective mental dreaming, as I've titled it before, this mass collective mental dreaming going on, King Sveta is a master. You can see there, and it's very nice, this top, if the live streaming audience can see this top quarter of the chart. Out of Brahman comes Brahma Sankalpa. That's Brahman's meditation in the Atman. That's his Atmic Sankalpa ability, King Sveta. And then, atmosphere of Sankalpic origin, the Jnanakasha. It's Atman's inherent intelligence, Paramakasha, that's creating a space for something to happen. There was no space before in the supreme state. Space was an idea that would come later. So first then, this Akasha has to be created. Very, very, very subtle, in fact, causal Akasha. And it has to create a space for ideas, for words, for thoughts, and later on that's going to become a space for objects and bodies and worlds and physical worlds too. But at this point it's still very much in ideation form, a very high ideation called pure intelligence and pure space. So King Swota knows about that. So he thinks about that, and this creates this atmosphere of sankalpa out of Atman's inherent intelligence. That's here. Then he creates a city called the Three Worlds, and those are presided over by Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Who else? The Trinity. And then a triple body. See, causal, astral, and physical, they call it. I would say causal, subtle, and physical is a better naming, but it's called Uttama, Madhya, and Adama. High, middling, and low. These are the three pillars in their causal form that his city is going to rest upon. Then out of those come the 14 spheres of existence, that is 7 heavens and 7 hells. And you can see on this side, this is called regression. So consciousness comes out of Brahman, comes as intelligence, sees the Trinity, and hits the Trinity's worlds of conception. And if it goes this way, it regresses back to the hells, patalas. Atala, Vitala, Sutatala, Talatala, Mahatala, Rasatala, and Patala itself are 7 grades of hell. That is all in the mind, by the way. So here we sort of get an idea of what heaven and hell is like in Indian thinking. It's not somewhere out in space or down in the ground. That's all kind of metaphoric or symbolic in Christendom. But basically, all of these worlds exist inside of you. Kingdoms of heaven are within you. My father's mansion has many chambers. Well, my father's mansion must have a basement too, maybe 7 levels of basement. So this is where souls dream themselves into great problems. This would be called nightmaric existence, you might say, or stuck existence. Somebody's telling me lately, I'm stuck. You see. So, but expansion is toward the life heavens. Bur, Buvar, Swar, Mahar, Jana, Tapar, and Satya. Does it sound familiar? Your great Gayatri mantra, Om, Bur, Bhuva, Swahas, the first 3 worlds. We want peace in those worlds. That's, AUM, as it were, too. Although AUM spreads itself out over all 7 of these, it's still a good representation of something that's gross, something that's subtle, and something that's causal. Now, you can see out of the heavens, if you transcend earth, lower heaven, higher heaven, then you can get to these realms of great austerity, great light, great truth, Satya, and you can see the ascension process actually turns into transcendence and immersion and comes back to Brahman. That's called one lifetime of a great seer. Comes, sees, plays, and disappears. So his is a lilik sankalpa, if anything. It's a videha mukti. He's one lifetime and he's disembodied, and he'll never come back again unless some precocious little child like Ramakrishna comes and talks you out of it. You see. So won't you come back with me, like he did to Vivekananda? Because Holy Mother said Swami Vivekananda sat like a wooden statue for 700 years in this highest akasha, until a little child made of golden light came to him and said, won't you come down to earth? The arc of the earth is sinking in lust and greed. We must go down and help them. And so Vivekananda was talked out of this higher condition of formless meditation and took form in Calcutta, where some of you have been with me in Calcutta. And Ramakrishna also came down, and so did Holy Mother, of course. It was a great Kali avatar. Avatar means that which descends. And so we look at this triple figure as the Kali avatar, the sometimes called the new dispensation of highest wisdom. So the point being here, Brahman, Sankalpa, it's Sankalpa on Atman, out of wisdom, out of highest intelligence, the 3 worlds with the Triputi presiding over it, probably Om, you could say Om is right in there too, and then the 3 bodies, 3 pillars on which these 14 spheres of existence, lokas and patalas, are going to be laid. And then coming down into those 14 worlds, the soul can either regress, get away from itself, get further and further lost, or it can expand into the world and into the lower heavens, higher heavens, the realm of the siddhas and munis, they call them, and then the realm of the saints and seers and the Vairagyas, the seven beings that preside over these seven worlds, and then Satya realm, that's also called Brahmaloka. That's the highest and most pure and most subtle of all form. It's really causal form. They say in Brahmaloka the soul can see the ocean of consciousness, but it's still holding itself back from it. So the great Rishi who presides over that realm is helping them get into formlessness and eventually merge. It's sort of, Sri Ramakrishna said about that realm, it's sort of like having a hut built on the ocean shore. And you go to your hut and you rest and you go in the ocean, go to the hut, go to the ocean. I know that when I lived on the ocean in Hawaii, so many years I was in the water almost more than I was on land. So, because I surfed as a youth, and it was a very beautiful experience. So I thought after 6 or 8 hours in the water, getting out, I would have fins after a while instead of feet. But that's the idea, is that you almost immerse yourself so often that you just feel as familiar in the water, as comfortable in the water as you do on land, or maybe even more so, like a sailor or something likes the ocean so much. So in that way, as a metaphor, we use it as that Brahmaloka is a realm where souls are almost ready to give up their final vestiges of separate self. That ego that you created when you first came out, you might say you created that little ego to have this separate sankalpic world play, but then as you dissolve the mind stream and go back inside, that ego is also the last thing you'll be holding on to. They say, you see, the Zen Roshi says, have you died on your cushion yet? Daishi. That means basically, has that ego died? And if you had your Zen insight, your great insight. So that will happen to a person at that level of Brahmaloka, which is less a world. We're talking about them as worlds, but they're more like stations of awareness inside of us. Not like planets in our space in a physical sense, but places where consciousness associates with, and many souls will associate with those. Fewer and fewer as it gets to the Brahmaloka, probably. Again, the point being, as you ascend the worlds, you can transcend them all. And that's where you have enlightenment, or satori, or moksha, or mukti, or kaivalya, or nirvikalpa, or savikalpa. Nirvana, I mean. So that's a matter of immersion back to Brahman. So this is one lifetime scenario that King Swota knows about, and he can project his city. However, if the sport wants to go on, then as he expands, he can actually take the path of reincarnation, can't he? Instead of ascending and just living one life, he can take the path of reincarnation, and then he falls into the influences of this, his own projection. King Swota's gardens, groves, pleasure resorts are pure earth. Physical universe called manifested Prakriti. Now he's come into the realm of name and form at its grossest vibrating level, where there is solid earth and liquid water and actual fire and so forth. And then the next level is the unquenchable two great lights, sun and moon. Also sometimes just means all the dualities. You can't quench those dualities, it's very hard, like hot and cold. Until you practice titiksha, or forbearance of those, and withdrawal, and inner peace and self-control, then you're not going to get beyond it. That's why they sing that song about the dualities and titiksha. Mono chalo nija niketane samsara videshe veshe brahmo kino karane mono chalo nija liketane. O mind, return to your own home, your eternal abode. You are a foreigner in this foreign land. Why do you roam about aimlessly with no real purpose? See, And later on he sings, Lo, Lo Bhamohadi Bhate Das Yugan Bhatir Ker Kore Sarva Shamoshan Paramajatone Rakore Prahore Shamodamo Dui Jane Mono Chalo Nija Eketane. There is a roadside inn called Holy Company. Take rest there if you are weary and tired. If you are confused about the way home, ask help of the holy ones who live there. If you get frightened along the way, call on the king of the land with all your heart. And with great care keep the two sentries, Sama and Dhamma, inner peace and self-control, to watch over you. And the song goes on like that with many other verses. It was the first song Swami Vivekananda, as Narendra, the young teenager, ever sang to Sri Ramakrishna when they first met in that lifetime. So it was very indicative and symbolic of their coming here to earth, a foreign land, as it were, because they're used to samadhi and they're used to these, satyaloka, they're used to these highest realms of pure, non-dual or almost non-dual awareness. So songs illustrate this too, in a very profound way. So many of them, hundreds and hundreds of them in the Hindu tradition. So the unquenchable great lights are the dualities. You have to keep inner peace and self-control with you, or else the highway robbers, these two pillars will come along and steal all your goods. They'll steal all your good merit. And then you can't get out of this whole area of reincarnation. Next is 7 tanks in Sota's city. That's the 7 great oceans, which we have here on earth. And it also really is symbolic of immersion or preoccupation with relativity. Take your choice. You can immerse in them, or you can take them as being real. Like I was saying over the retreat, you can surf them, you can swim them, you can mine them, you can fish them, you can dive them, but you never know that what they're telling you is that waves rising are just souls rising on the ocean of consciousness, and nothing is born and nothing dies in that great ocean. It just rises and falls, and the ocean remains the same. So many, many souls come out of this ocean, they sink back into it, and nothing has ever happened, and the ocean stays the same. That's Brahman. There are Sota's many gardens of creepers. That's the mighty rivers, which are irresistible flows of prana that are flowing through everything. I would say if you were a seer with the tendency like Svota has, or Dashara, who's telling the story, and he looks on the earth, he looks at the rivers and he sees flows of prana. Then he looks at the human body across from him and he sees the nerves in them, and he sees flows of prana. Then he looks inside the nerves of that person, which there are 100,000 subtle nerves in one nerve in your body, and he sees flows of prana. And those flows of prana taking souls to death, beyond death, taking souls back into life again, taking souls into deep sleep, bringing them back out into waking, and taking them finally all the way to Mother herself and to immersion in Brahman. These are passageways. Some of them are great highways, like Kaivalya Pragbara and Samsara Pragbara, great dams, great rivers that souls are going into Om, and then souls are going into Samsara all the time. Huge amount of souls are going both directions. And then some of them are just tributaries, and some are rivers, and some are streams, and some are backwater kind of alleyways, that that take people nowhere. So these are the mighty rivers in King Svota's projection. His creatures are devas, nagas, and humans. So he had three great pillars at the causal level, and as it comes down, now he has three great pillars at the subtle level. Up there, the three great pillars are the three worlds, causal, subtle, and physical, but or gross. And now down here, there are three great pillars that are devas, nagas, and humans. Basically, that's the three gunas. The devas are sattvic, the nagas are rajasic, and the humans are tamasic. So those are the three gunas, which are the three great pillars. Svota's creatures. King Svota's many assumed bodies are multiple spacious halled apartments. The walls are made of skin, roofs are made of hair, and the log framework are bones, he says. As Lord Vishishta describes them in Yogas Vishishta. So a very beautiful analogy there. They also have 9 windows, those spacious halled apartments. Those are the 9 apertures of the body. 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, you see. So you have 9 windows that are looking in and also bringing in and out again. And that's his experiences through these 9 windows. His Svota's awareness are the 5 beautiful lights. Those are called the 5 senses. 5 beautiful lights. Each of them, the eyes have a light, the ears have a light, and tongue has a light, and smell has a light. They're all Indriyas, aren't they? And Indra is the god of gods. He's the god of the whole shooting match that falls below Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, of course. From, you might say, there on down, Indra has control over everything in the subtle and gross world. So his jeweled net has everything wrapped up in it. And each facet of the jeweled net is a mirror. That mirror looks into another world. So he has millions of worlds he looks into. But these 5 senses are also called Indriyas, named after him, Indra. So they are all full of light. If you purify the senses, and eventually you will see nothing but Brahman here. But if your senses are impure, you'll see, an amalgam or admixture of good, bad, and mixed things here. Or maybe you're in a very tamasic state, you'll see nothing but evil and suffering here. 5 beautiful lights. And then his various pleasures in the city are the many powerful winds that blow through the sense objects. Those are the sense objects themselves. Many powerful winds. In other words, the desire for them. Desire is a great wind that's blowing people here and there, chasing after the various scents that come from those flowers of desire. That's why we sing in that beautiful song. Gunahina sutan aparadayutan kripayadya samudara mohagatan Taranim bhava sagara prakarim, and so forth. So it means renounce my mind be the sense flowers of this earth. Drink instead the nectar of Mother's lotus feet. Vishayam kusumam parishricha sada charanya bharuhamrita, the nectar. Shanti sudham, purity, pure and peaceful. See those flowers. Drink the nectar from those flowers instead of these flowers of ill design and the flowers of simply gross manifestation. Everyone gets all, oh, look at the beautiful flowers, but what do they symbolize? See, you do chado, as we did last week at the Zen retreat. It means tea. So we all had tea in a Zen way together. And there was great love flowing, and there was koans, and there was haiku that were rising in us all the time. We immersed ourselves in that tradition, and all of these things began to become familiar with us. And chado and kado means tea and flowers. So you would, if you had more time, you would have arranged flowers, not just to see who makes the best arrangement, but to actually do it in a Zen way. And the way it comes out is the perfect expression. So renounce my mind be the sense flowers. Go for those higher flowers. So like that, these various pleasures of the city blow aromas from flowers to different destinations, and people run after them in their desire for them. The next level, the two ghostly arms. That's Svota's ephemeral friend who protects the city. His whole arms are wrapped around the whole city. That's ego and its resistance to meditation on Brahman, which impedes progress in Atmagyan. So that will keep the city protected, as you might have noticed, from anyone doing any real beneficial thing in it, like meditation on Brahman, or like getting knowledge of the Atman. So those two are keeping those other two from entering into the city, the protective arms. If you look back in our Nectar of Non-Dual Truths, you'll see the cover that illustrates that. It's called, in fact, this story and its teaching is in that issue. I don't know which number it is, but it's there, and it has the two great arms that the artist drew for me, and all the inner city that's going on there. All a very beautiful teaching to contemplate. It's a day's teaching in itself, and it's a week's meditation just to think about it. This chart actually is also in that issue, if you want to find it there. Finally, you have Svota's sport in the halls of the city. That's constant and restless transmigration in samsara, cycles of birth and death. He's constantly coming and going in and out of that city all the time. In his case, though, of course, he can do it masterfully, and then he can just put it all into abeyance, you see, and return back to his original self, which most beings cannot do. They get stuck for thousands of lifetimes. So this is King Svota's Sankalpa city, told by the Rishi Dashura in Yoga Vashishta to his mind-born son, which is actually being told by Lord Vashishta himself to Ram. Three stories, one inside the other. Three great pillars of their own, you might say. Now, all of that, as a complement to our usual Samkalpa chart, gives us a whole nother fleshed out version of a beautiful way of Sankalpa, to look at it in such a way. There's a final quote down here: the manifestation of Atmagyan, that's knowledge of the self, as visible things is Sankalpa, but contemplating them as being real leads to unhappiness. Nice, huh? The manifestation of the wisdom of the Atman is Sankalpa. Brahman remains beyond. You see, first Brahman, and then it meditates on the Atman. The Atman takes on 5 sheaths. Those 5 sheaths might as well be this whole, contain all of this in them. Because there are realms, there are akashas. They're intelligence akasha, they're mind akasha, they're energy akasha, and they're physical akasha. Vijnanamaya kosha, manomaya kosha, pranamaya kosha, and anamaya kosha. The physical of ana, made of food. So all of those contained within there. So if you realize all of this is just the play of the Atman in intelligence, then you can project it, sustain it, and withdraw it at will. Consciously, not just waking, dreaming, deep sleep, where in deep sleep you do dissolve it, but it comes back on you, wake up again, and you didn't know what happened during that period of deep sleep. But contemplating all of this as being real, then winds you up in this regression and hells and heavens. Actually, a kind of regression and expansion that's going on in cycles again and again. We haven't looked at that chart for so long, so it's nice that we look at it. It's in the SRV's version called the Quintessential Yoga Vashishta, which is, quintessentialized version of that large work. You can get it through SRV, and it was my own translations that are there. And you can also find it in that Nectar of Non-Dual Truth if you want to pore over it and look at it. It's a great system which describes a lot of what's coming up next. Now, what's coming up next in the remaining time is also familiar to us, and I'm not going to go through it at length. But it follows these slokas. The individual soul is as subtle as a hairpoint, divided and subdivided many hundreds of times. Yet it is potentially infinite. It has to be known. So there's that idea of a hairpoint divided many, many times, like that nerve inside of you has 100,000 nerves inside of it. This has been known to India from time out of mind, and as the years have gone by and as the ages have darkened, that is Satya to Treta to Dvapara to Kali, we have lost track of this. Beings do not know now where they come from, where beings go after death, and if essentially they don't know that coming and going is all nonsense. Nothing comes and goes. It just rises and falls eternally. And as my teacher said, if you identify with the surface of the ocean, you get tossed by its waves. But if you identify with the depths, there's nothing but peace, peace, peace. So you dive deep, O mind, into the ocean of God's beauty. There you will find the gem of love. See, so you dive down, you're a pearl diver, you take a big breath and you go deep in meditation. Stay there for a while until you get used to the depths. Or if you want to put it in terms of a mountain, until you get used to the height and the altitude. Whatever the case may be, you should know that this is all happening through a series of nerve endings. Nadis, they're called. Medical science calls them nerves, nerve endings and so forth, and we're associating them with pleasure and pain and air. You see, it's like the sense of touch. But the yogis know that inside of each one of those nerves there are 100,000 more. For instance, the quotes on this chart, we've already seen it, and there is an illustration for the live streaming audience. See how many pathways are there in the whole 7 chakra system, all under Divine Mother's auspice, and also containing Bhur, Bhuvar, Swaha, Mahar, Jana, Tapar, and Brahmaloka, right? Just like we saw back here in the worlds, the life heavens, you see. But this quote here that is here from the Shvetashvatara Upanishad is, the individual soul is as subtle as a hairpoint, divided and subdivided hundreds of times. And you see I've placed that there on the chart. Also, within the recesses of the heart is the akasha of consciousness. Remember, akasha means space, but it's not just ether, physical ether. There's many other forms of space inside of you, shaped like the calyx of a lotus in which all the universes exist. It can't be much clearer than that to explain to you the kingdoms of heaven within, which were cryptic messages given by Christ to the apostles. My Father's mansion has many chambers and so forth. So these are actually hooking up or connecting these akashas inside of you with the way souls get to them. In ignorance, they get to them tonight in dreaming and deep sleep. But in knowledge, they get to them through meditation, and they see the kingdoms of heaven within, and they become familiar with them, and they become versatile at coursing through them, up and down the amber stairs of birth and death, as Sri Aurobindo said in one of those books there on our bookshelf. There's a nice way of saying it here, too, in the Prajna Upanishad. In the heart dwells the Atman. There are 101 nerves centered there, and in each of those are 100 more. And each of these branches into 72,000 other nadis. In all of these, Shakti power flows. So this prana that eventually becomes Shakti as it reaches the higher worlds is just one energy that's flowing through everything, like a great river out of which other rivers are merging and dividing. So they say 3, really, one major one, the Sushumna, and then the Ida and the Pingala, going up in circle, right? That's the Kundalini system. There are 3 great rivers. The Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, I've often called them. If you're the explorer and you want to find the new America, then you have to course these 3 great rivers inside. So they say here, bathe at the most sacred confluence of holy rivers, found within the precious human body, and where the three spiritual nerve channels meet. So if you look at all of these different references in the different 108 Upanishads, or even in the few 11 that Shankara commented on that we have translated for us by the Ramakrishna order, then you'll find and begin to make these connections yourself. And here at the bottom is the final quote, and that's what we chanted this morning at meditation. Om Ara Eva Ratanabhau Samhatra Natratyadyaha Sa Ishonchos Tarate Buhuda Jayamanaha Om Mityevam Jayatha Atmanam Svastivaha Parayaha Tamasaha Parastat. So basically it says, there in the heart, where all the subtle nerve endings meet, like the spokes of a chariot wheel at the hub, abides the Atman, stationary but becoming manifold. That it is all-pervasive, but as you can see, its light of intelligence flows out and forms worlds and beings. Meditate on that as Om. That self is Om. And Godspeed to you in crossing over to the farthest shore beyond all darkness. May you transcend all of that, you see, and get into immersion in Brahman. Oneness. Those various words that I used earlier for it. Nirvikalpa, Samadhi, and Satori, and so forth. Now, let's keep going, because we have studied this chart several times over the last month too. But we want to also look at it, and we studied and read this chart too, but we want to keep following the Upanishad's course that it's setting for us. In Sloka 9 it says, it is neither female nor male nor neuter. Whatever body it assumes, it becomes identified with that. By desire, context, sight, and delusion, the embodied soul assumes, successively, various forms in various places according to its deeds. So it has all these worlds in which to create and live out and hopefully work out its karma. There were many questions about that at the prison class I gave in Salem a couple nights ago. We left a question-answer period after giving some of these teachings, and they were asking about where souls go and where they come from, and after a soul passes from the body, how long does it take to reincarnate again, and so forth. Well, you can see here by Holy Mother's references that we find when she was alive, that she has explained a lot of that to us. She says, all beings excepting highly advanced souls live in a spirit body for a year after death. The spirit body can be likened to a body made of air. So souls sometimes leave the body, take a year to think about it, as it were, and come back. They choose their parents, they choose their nation, they choose their gender. That's why it says here, it is neither male, female, nor neuter. So it has to make a choice as to what form it's going to embody with, and that's going to be in accord with its karmas, as the quote says. So it's going to work out those karmas in the best possible way, but if it gets sidetracked, we call that this nowadays putting out fires, right? Then that purpose you came here for, you get waylaid. Mono chalo nijanikitane, O mind, return to your own abode. Why are you wandering around like a foreigner in a foreign land? Get down to the business of living free. That is, be born in freedom, live in freedom, pass away in freedom. That means consciousness, in full consciousness. And therefore, get over this process of transmigration that is all nonsense, as Vivekananda called it, coming and going in ignorance. Why don't you come and go in dream life, see, in assumed life, assumed body, never considering it to be real, because if you consider it all to be real, then it solidifies in front of you and you're caught in it. The net of Maya, they call it. So she says again, after the fashion, after a birth in a human body, some attain salvation, whereas others take inferior births to reap the results of their karma. Because not all can be free from desire, the creation is going on because all cannot be free from desires. But that is the last birth indeed in which you will get rid of all desires. So we're looking at the very low rung of the ladder here, aren't we, when we talk about desire, ego, and cycles of birth and death. You're pretty much caught there at a very low level of that sankalpa. Probably someone else's sankalpa, and you're participating in it, like your ancestors. That's why Lord Buddha wanted to sit and get beyond his ancestors, so he wouldn't be pulled in again. He renounced castle, renounced wife, renounced son, whom he named Rahula, chain around my neck, went away, got free, came back, gave him the Buddha way, saved them that way, freed them. So you cannot be free, you cannot teach others freedom while you're bound. Very poor teacher. So you have to get free yourself, and then everything you do will be a teaching and will help free them. And she says the spirit body can be likened to a body made of air. Well, I was telling them at this prison class a couple nights ago that that's why sometimes old beings hang on to the body, because they're looking for the next body. You wonder, why are they hanging around so much? They're suffering, there's a lot of problems, they're old, they can't move, but still they hang on to the body. Quite often, that's not just fear of death, can be, but there's a mixture of that with the inchworm finding its next purchase place. You see, here's the old body, and it's feeling around for a new body. I can't use the microphone, but it finally finds a purchase place and lets go of this end. So they're looking for a birth. That's why they're... So many of the problems in our society that we're worried about, brooding about, and wondering about are answered simply by looking into the Vedanta and the various philosophies of India, and also teachings in certain religious traditions that also explain. But you could say in Vedanta, as I said, non-dual teachings are there with the accent. Qualified non-dual teachings like these are there, and even teachings at the dualistic level are there to help people on that level. So it's a very rich tradition that explains much to you. A few selections out of that chart. We've looked at it so much recently, but it is a collection of Holy Mother Sri Sharda Devi's teachings that she gave during her life that I collected together in one of our books called Sri Sharda Vijnana Gita. Gita song, Vijnana, highest wisdom. So it's her song of highest wisdom, which she sang during her life, and which gave us answers to a lot of these problems that not only they were thinking about in India, that had evolved away from a lot of its own light, and also in the West, who never had their own light to begin with, had to borrow from places like the Eastern wisdom traditions. So if you're in doubt and ignorant of these spiritual facts, then bolster yourself up with them by study and meditation on them. The next thing I wanted to show you in accord with these this very teaching are these two charts about the mind's release from rebirth and the illusory ego's projection via rebirth. Let's take this one as a quick study first. I call it my spider web chart. It's the only one that I had to create a spider web for, which is very apropos. By desire, contact, sight, and delusion, the embodied soul assumes successive various forms in various places according to its deeds, just as the body grows nourished by showers of food and drink. So nourishing that ladder of sankalpa is also a problem. We call it sustenance, and we are not doing much work to release ourselves from pleasures and pains. We think they're inevitable, and they are inevitable to that one who is lost in the cycle of samsara, as Buddha said. But to that person who becomes fearless and who becomes resolute, then they're going to go against the grain, go upstream. All the pleasure crafts are going downstream, and you're going to take your own little kayak and you're going to reach the source. You want to go against the grain. That's what happens when the soul frees itself from sankalpa in a mayic sort of way. And this chart illustrates it nice. Again, sort of like our other chart, it starts out as, everything starts as Brahman, all is Brahman. And then it gains a body, and it begins to head into samsara. Brahman attains the incalpable state of Parabrahman, and then how does it fall out of that? It projects a world of dire illusion and dwells therein. That, of course, is illustrated very well by King Sota's Sankalpa Siddhi. So projecting that world of dire delusion comes out from the mind in bondage called impure mind and begins this lower trajectory, moves restlessly and bleeds among the sharp brambles and thorns of sense objects, pleasure and pain, subjects itself to endless pains via self-inflicted whips of unfulfilling desire, digs a well in darkness and frequents it in misery, seeks release from ignorance and takes refuge in pleasure. Big mistake, as they say. Then projects a pleasure garden, but soon tires and falls into fatigue and remorse. That is, after much enjoyment. And then it gets reborn in ignorance, because its mind was never freed while it lived. It went to death in ignorance. So this lower part of the web, all very indicative of Maya or samsara and the constant cycles, the web of Maya. Now the story is of Manas. Manas means mind. And Ram is asking Vashishta to inform him as to the nature of dual mind and inert body. What is that purgastika body, that body-mind mechanism we call it, or psychophysical being in Vedanta? What's that all about? As one person asked again in that prison class a couple nights ago, why don't we just stay Brahman? I said, well, we do. It can never be anything but Brahman. You're always your true nature. But you sankalpa your way away from it. You dream yourself away from it and forget it. Forgetfulness, of course, or put it adversely, remembrance is the key to everything. Remembering your true nature. And that's precisely what Manas does finally when he takes this upper trajectory. See, the whole story is about Brahma and his mind-born child, Vashishta. There are 10 of his mind-born children. Lord Brahma is one of the Trinity. And so Lord Brahma says, come with me, I want to show you something. So he goes to this world where Manas is constantly doing this to himself. That is the mind. And he's digging a well, climbing out of it, enjoying, suffering, falling back into the well, over and over and over again in rounds of birth and death and ignorance. Vashishta first sees Lord Brahma go up to Manas and grab him, make him stay still, and counsels him and teaches him. But Manas wanders away and runs to the well again, or runs to the pleasure garden, and so forth. You can see it's all very symbolic of the soul hearing the truth, but not responding to it. That's why I chanted this morning. Some have heard of the Atman, but failed to comprehend it. And others have heard of it. Some never hear of it. So if you hear of this pure, indivisible, original soul, which would be original mind that's not in bondage, as Sri Ramakrishna said, that soul in bondage, you see, or the soul free. The soul free is God. The soul in bondage is the individual body-mind mechanism. So this mind in bondage going in constant cycles, and Brahma tries to counsel it. And finally, he does that after lifetime. Manas falls back in the well, comes out again as Manas, falls back in the well, comes out again as Manas. And finally, Vashishta says, let's go. He's worthless. No, nothing's going to help him. And Lord Brahma says, wait. And so one lifetime after Brahma counsels him, he comes out, just before he falls into the well, he has his moment of light, and he yells out, he laughs like a madman. big laugh emits, but then he falls in the well. The next time he comes out, he's a different person, different being. And I give you that ahead of time to explain this upper trajectory. First, the soul gains a glimpse of truth, but only at the moment of death. That, if you've been around dying people, you know sometimes that happens, that there's a great light that visits them suddenly. It's a little bit too late to practice. The Tibetan Buddhists say you should have gotten all of this wisdom of the Dharma before you approach death, but you can still get free if the Rinpoche is at your bedside. But how many of us have a Rinpoche waiting to come? You see, when we die, to call him up. Hello, will you come? I'm about to die. Most of us don't even know when we're going to die, and it might come suddenly, and again, it might take time, depending on finding the next purchase point, you see. So, whatever the case may be there, this soul all of a sudden gains a glimpse of insight at the time of death, then is reborn with half-developed wisdom and seeks for guidance. Finally, gains holy company, grace of a wise guru, and initiation into the path, whether you call it taking hand with the Sufis, or taking refuge in the Buddha, or mantra diksha with the Vedantists and so forth. There's ways of taking initiation in a path with a wise teacher. And that's what the illumined do every time they come here to this world. You might have noticed. They'll immediately, first thing, purify their body with mantra, so they'll be accepted in any circle of holy beings. Otherwise, you're a horse and they're cows, and they'll drive you away from the herd, you see, as Ramakrishna said. So in order to get accepted by holy company, you must be a part of holy company. You must have purified your body by taking initiation in some way. And then you can start working on your karma and dispelling it. So that soul is seeking right away, and if he follows the wise, he'll see the wise doing the same thing. Oh, they're going to that teacher when they're young. They're getting initiation. They're getting instruction. Even if they don't need it, if they already understand everything, they still do it because they're here at the very apex of samsara, you see, where all minds are in bondage. A very strong force of sankalpa is going on. Then the next is samsaric cycles finally begin to end. They master desire, break attachment, and attain jnanam. In the path of Lord Vashishta, jnanam is it, basically. It's a wisdom path, and especially that jnanam called Atma Jnana, the wisdom that's particularly associated with the self, or Atman. Not the anatman, which is ego, but the Atman, the pure, indivisible self, what Buddha called Tathagatagarbha, or Pragyaparam. See, that's Buddha nature, our Atman. Now, he breaks attachments and attains jnanam. He attains the incomparable state of Parabrahma, the supreme Brahman, and breaks the web of Maya forever. It's all open-ended from there. It can go back to Brahman. As Vashishta says, and then we'll have to take our break and come back later and show you the same process in a different way. He says, all become subject to bondage in a web of delusion due to their desire-based mental projections. So, strike off thy fetters, bonds that bind thee down, of shining gold or darker baser ore. No slave or slave is caressed or whipped not free. So that kind of ideation, and Vivekananda's great Song of the Sannyasin means strike off those feathers is begin to break those mental projections, draw them back in, resolve them, and your karmas will also resolve or attenuate with them. So the mind's release from rebirth, I'll leave you with that for our break, and the live streaming audience can continue to see it on their screen. And then we will come back and look at Shukra, how he fell from a very high state of grace into the worlds of name and form, and what happened to him, according to the great Lord Vashishta. So please take 10 or 15 minutes, and we will be back soon. Namaste. for the second half of our class and the Vedanta studies. We are continuing on immersing ourselves in some of the Yoga Vishishta charts and stories that so indicative of many of the Vedantic teachings. And the Vedic teachings actually also, which were pre-Vedantic era, pre-Upanishadic. So many of the good teachings were so ancient like that and really just got distilled and formulated into the Vedanta when the Upanishads were finally composed out of the great minds of these rishis. So Lord Vishishta, kind of a primal being, one very ancient. If he was back with Ram, who is probably the most distant avatar we have on historical record, we can't even place him historically very easily, but previous to Krishna for sure. So you're talking about a very ancient and hoary old sage who was one of the main priests of King Dasaratha's court in the Kosala kingdom, where Ram lived and grew up with Sita, and where the whole Ramayana epic took place with Ravana and Hanuman and all those great figures that people that great bit of itihasa. A version of it called the Adhyatma Ramayana, which is the non-dual version of it, which we cherish very much. So in that Yoga Vishishta cross-section, we're talking very ancient teachings, these charts then being very rudimentary, really some of the earliest charts I ever composed. But at the same time, we see how long ago they had this wisdom of rebirth and dying consciously, and the idea of sankalpa and worlds and name and form and where it came from and how it sported and how it got caught, trapped apparently, and how it freed itself. So ancient that it turns into a marvel in one's mind when one contemplates it. To also sort of begins to cut time down, which you do in meditation and in deep sleep anyway, and very definitely in samadhi, and realize the illusoriness of time, and also the eternal moment of time that in which a great rishi like Vishishta continues to teach us through the teacher and through the hearts and minds of beings in a physical space even. So it's all, bring it all forward and coalesce it, then you have very profound realizations, grounds for realization. Now, let me read Sloka 12 for you again. Actually, we looked at Sloka 10, 11, 12 as rebirth slokas. I think even 8. Subtle as a hair point divided and subdivided 100 times, begins to lead us toward that idea of all the different births that people have taken. The teaching I was given again in the prison class, I keep coming back to that, with those 14 or so inmates that were there, listening very raptly to this, attentively to this transmission, was about that process of embodiment and how the witness is always present, watching the births and the apparent births and lives and deaths of the transmigrating soul as it goes from place to place. So that means you are always present, watching yourself be born, watching yourself live, watching yourself pass away, as it were, or dissolve back into the ocean of consciousness, which means that if you really identified more with that witness, they call it Sakshi Bhutam, the witness of all phenomena. That's also a very ancient saying in Sanskrit. Then you would know yourself to be eternal, and you'd know all of this to be sankalpa, as it's being described by Lord Vishishta, the sankalpa vikalpa process, and it's happening on a mass collective mental dreaming, as I said, individual, collective, and even cosmic levels. That's where the gunas become huge, great pillars, the sattvic creation of Brahma and the tamasic goings on and the tamasic goings on, so much activity and so much inertia, and then that attainment of balance all the time as we go back and forth. So also one becomes aware of the misleading concepts that are being foisted on us out there by various ways of thinking that are not tuned into such Atmagyan, the knowledge of the self, like the void, for instance, and how we've also know there's a word for it, and there must be a witness to the void, otherwise we would have never known it. There's someone looking on, or that one reality looking on, which is inside of which else is contained, like waves in ocean, water in ocean, including sea spray and flecks and all the aquatic beings in an ocean. It's a very apt metaphor. Well, it is therefore very bewitching. Maya can be termed as being world bewitching Maya, as Ramakrishna told it, because the great prayers of some of the highest beings were, may I be granted pure love, pure devotion, and pure wisdom, pure love for thy lotus feet. Oh, and by the way, never let me get seduced by thy world bewitching Maya. Let's throw that into the prayer just to be safe, you see, because even great beings like Sukra got bewitched, and he was one of the highest of beings. He was sitting with his father in one of the highest realms, Brahmaloka-like realm, and they were meditating together. And so that's his causal body, but so that's really his real body. And during his meditation, he caught sight of, he left the highest position and came down and viewed the worlds, and he caught sight of Indra's realm, very beautiful realm, and saw a particular goddess there that he cherished, and went, when he came out of his rumination, and then he actually separated from his subtle body and took his causal body and took a subtle body and went to Indra's Loka and found her. And for 8 Mahayugas they sported together. That's a very, very long time, much longer than 4,320,000,000 year evolutionary cycle of science. So when they finally consummated, then they pledged their divine love to each other for eternity under the Kalpa tree of paradise, and then went their own way, she back to Indraloka and he back to find his father in his real body, sit next to his father again. As he wended his way back, he got confused by the smoky path. He was supposed to take the sunlit path. Krishna in the Gita says those are the 2 eternal paths by which beings come and go. That is, by the sunlit path they go never to return, and the smoky path they come and get caught in that whole bit here of their own sankalpa, you see. So he got waylaid and began to get disoriented, and if I remember the story properly, it's that he beheld the earth and he beheld snow falling on a field, and he got very, very hypnotized by that in his subtle body, watching that beautiful scene, snow falling on paddy field, rice field. So he became a snowflake then, and with it, and fell, and that melted and nourished the earth and the paddy grew into rice, and the rice was harvested by the farmer, and then the rice was eaten, converted into sperm, given to the wife of the farmer in an act of love to bear children, and then he was born. Sukra came out as a young boy, and he, of course, forgotten his father sitting there. Brigu was his father, was like one of his greatest names in all of Rishidom is Brigu. So his father's still sitting up there in the causal realm, keeping that causal body, and meditating on Brahman, and he's left his body still sitting there next to Brigu, but he's left it, not in meditation, but in sankalpa. So he comes down to earth and gets into this predicament. Well, here you can see it in a chart that the live streaming audience can look at. Everything really is Parabrahma Atman, and there's Brigu and Nirvikalpa meditating, and his son next to him. Here's Yama, the Lord of Death, the other end of the spectrum, waiting, as it were. And this is the Atmic Sankalpa, rays of jnana, light, coming down out of Parabrahma's meditation on Atman, turning into intelligence. Intelligence turning into mind with its powers of sankalpic projection. Mind, out of that came the birth of Sukra, the son of Brigu, and he seeks heaven and sports with the goddess Vishvachi in Indraloka. That's all what I just explained. When he got done with the sport and he falls from Indraloka into Sankalpic projection, and you can see there the rest of the chart, he mingles the mind with the moon's rays, enters as prana into the form of snow, falls on paddy fields, nourishes rice and becomes food, gets eaten by a Brahmin priest, or the farmer's Brahmin priest, and converted into sperm and given to wife. Then he's born as the son of a priest, Sukra. The little bits that the chart isn't telling, of course, in the story is that since he's born as the son of a Brahmin priest, he has all the opportunities to gain enlightenment, that is, get free of that. Just live one life and be free, as we were talking about earlier, and not drag things on and on interminably. But he gets attracted to a woman and has a child and puts all his energy into a son, and therefore his series of births begin. He gets bewitched away by the world bewitching Maya into this whole Sankalpic projection of his own, and performs tapas, marries and has offsprings, becomes enslaved to the world, and then a series of lifetime ensues. There I brought the scripture for you. I'll just read straight out of it, a couple paragraphs. This crucial mistake of forgetting his spiritual aims due to the insinuation of worldliness left him helpless against Maya and its influences. Thus his mind fostered a growing attachment for the world and its concerns. In short, O Ram, this Vashishta telling the story to Ram, the son of Brigu fell from his true state and entered into a series of projected lifetimes as in a dream. Ram says, this is perplexing and mysterious indeed. Can this series of projected births be followed and described? Oh, Ram's got this very deep curiosity about how beings come and they go. The transmigration process. Indeed, said the great Rishi, but who can fathom how consciousness moves and acts when really it is ever free from movement and action? A runner in a dream actually goes nowhere, though he sees scenery going by and feels his lungs and heart pumping. In like fashion did Sukra dream himself through the experiences of being everything, from a fragrance on a breeze to the beloved son of a illumined Muni. Along the dreamway he found himself extremely restful as a forest of bamboo. He floated regally on pristine mountain waters as a white swan, and slithered through a dense forest in search of prey as a huge boa constrictor. Then he moved along in the body of a hunter, killing stags and other four-legged animals in the thick woods, only to find himself incarnated as a stag, panting as he ran through the forest to escape a hunter on his tail. Then he became a powerful chief of the hill tribes, then a royal king. And this royal birth and its boons gave way to the desire for several more, as the king of the Vidyadharas first, holders of wisdom, and finally a king of the solar line, like your father, seated before us. This is all taking place in the great hall of Dasaratha, and Dasaratha is one of the kings of the solar line. And that is how he became a Shaivite guru, and then a famed guru of the solar line, a birth which is duly ended in a final desire for glory, and led him to incarnate as the son of a Muni, a birth very difficult to attain, O prince. At present he has taken final birth as a rishi named Vasudev. This is the line of incarnations Sukra took, as sought after and uncovered by the subtle powers of omniscient seers. So there you see this whole series of the chart has been pulled from that story of Lord Vashishta's. And so that illustrates the chart and the power of Maya. Lord Vashishta said later in the story, just as a stone may have many figures carved in it, so too in the one Brahman all worlds exist and lives manifest themselves. So consider this like a beautiful Japanese or Chinese sculpture in wood or in sandstone, where all these worlds and dragons and trees and rivers and lakes are all cut in one piece of wood. It's sort of like the idea of the formless Brahman. On its surface you can cut forms into it, and that's the Sankalpa process. And those are the many, many lives of beings coming and going all the time. Explains nicely this whole cosmic process And that's what the Shvetashvatara Upanishad is pointing through in these penultimate slokas of chapter 5. I'll read them again. That individual soul is as subtle as a hair point, divided and subdivided hundreds of times, yet it is potentially infinite. It has to be known. It is neither male nor female nor neuter. Whatever body it assumes, it becomes identified with that. By desire, contact, sight, and delusion, the embodied soul assumes successive various forms in various places according to its deeds, just as the body grows nourished by showers of food and drink. The embodied self chooses many forms, gross and subtle, qualities based on the qualities belonging to itself, to its actions, and to the mind. The cause of their combination is found to be still another. Then the penultimate sloka of this chapter, realizing that who is without beginning or end, who creates the cosmos in the midst of chaos, who assumes many forms, and who alone envelops everything, one becomes free from all fetters. So strike off thy fetters, as we ended in the first half. So this is another one of the many stories that you find here in Yoga Vashishta. I'll show you that book, which has come out within the last couple of years. Many, many beautiful stories in there. Some of them very inscrutable, but still a way of explaining a lot of this process that goes on from cosmic to collective to individual by a very ancient realized soul, using all of the ancient rishis in his stories and their experiences with kings, merchants, priests, ordinary beings, suffering beings, untouchables, pariahs, a whole gamut of humanity worked into this great, you might call it Atmagyan, Sankalpa, Lord Vashishta that he's participating in. And also how he is counseling the young avatar of the age who doesn't not yet know he's the avatar of the age. That's how thick Maya is, that you can be a divine incarnation and not know it till Mother reveals it to you. It makes much more of an impression when everything happens at the right moment. So not only on the individual soul, which is not so much a problem in Ram's case, of course, but to the collective humanity around Ram who's watching. In fact, Vashishta was one of 12 rishis of the thousands of rishis that were alive at that time. Only 12 knew that Ram was a divine incarnation. It was a secret to all of these others illumined souls. So Vashishta is counseling him to bring out that hidden avatarhood in him so that he can do all the great things he was destined to do in his life that became such legend that thousands of years later we're still reading about it. And millions of people are still having Ram as their chosen ideal. Krishna just being a further incarnation of Ram. Really, those two souls are one. Now, there's one other way I want you to look at this whole birth process, which is more informational for us, and that's the Buddhist way. They talk about the chain of births and deaths, called nidanas. That is 12 links in Buddhism, which cover 3 lifetimes. So I'd say for the ordinary person who has become a seeker, unless they can muster great intensity and become a Buddha in one lifetime, as the Zen Buddhists say, actually 1 minute Zazen, 1 minute a Buddha. The minute you sit like this with your tripod stance, it opens the base chakra naturally, just by sitting like this. And energy is already flowing up the spine, and that's why people don't know what to do with it. Before they're really taught asana, they should have been taught the 10 yamas and niyamas so that they can prepare for that sitting. And then breathing exercise will help them direct that energy, which is udgata, which is not kundalini yet. It's udgata, a precursor to that energy that's flowing up the spine, which can get people in all sorts of trouble, as we know, and misunderstand the teachings and make presumptuous and immature, premature declarations about their own status, which is just a kind of pretentiousness and delusion. Enlightenment dawns on the mind by stages. Who said that? Sri Ram, when he grew up. See? Enlightenment dawns on the mind by stages, so it has to be gradual avastas, that on one stage you'll meet your teacher, one stage you'll practice more intensely, and one stage you'll be ready to sand away that karmic world you put in the log of Brahman. Sand it away. So you dissolve the mind stream, get rid of all your karmas. That's what this is referring to, a person who awakens to their Buddha nature in this case. Now you see these 12 links coming in 4 phases. Let's look at the 4 phases first. Nidana 1 and 2 are from your previous existence. So already you're going to have to accept the idea that you've had many births. And for those of you who have been raised in a culture that thinks inside of one lifetime scenario, then it's a stretch of the mind. You have to sort of lend yourself to it to begin with, as if it were a sort of concept maybe that you want to entertain. And then when you get deeper into it, you might begin to call it a relative truth, like we do in our path. Not just a concept, a relative truth. Not an absolute truth, because coming and going is all nonsense, as Vivekananda said. That one soul stays in the same place, that one supreme soul, and then its power of dreaming, see, Shakti, dynamism, power of dreaming does all the rest. With the Word and with the Trinity and with the Great Mind, all of this process starts forward. Some being know about that can course along it and give it up. Some people course along it, come back again in consciousness. Those are Videha Muktis and Jivan Muktis. Some people course along it, get lost in it for hundreds of lifetimes. There's 3 choices for you right there. Should I embody perfectly in one lifetime? Should I embody, then have compassion for my fellows and come back as a bodhisattva, as how they would call it? Or the 3rd choice, which is a poor choice indeed. Choose parents who are unenlightened, suffer bad upbringing, be born in a culture that doesn't believe in Dharma, doesn't seek Dharma, doesn't believe in God, and so forth and so on. You might have noticed, as the saying goes. The 2nd level is Nidanas 3 through 8, which we'll get into in a minute. Condition the present existence. That's your, instead of working out the karma from a past existence, you're adding to it more conditioning. We'd call that vivarta, like false superimposition, adding more gloom on gloom, as Vivekananda's poem states. Yet is drags from birth to death and death to birth to soul, he says, piles more gloom on gloom. The third there is Nidanas 8 through 10. They're the fruits and effects of the present existence, what you get after that conditioning happens. And finally, the future existence is set up for you. Like I said in the first half, old people refusing to die, waiting. Why are they waiting? Is it just fear of death, or is it just a natural deterioration of the body till finally disease takes it? Or is it actually the soul has some control over that, unknowingly or knowingly, and it's just waiting for its next body, wants to incarnate again because it's attached to life, which is the fourth great klesha, isn't it, in yoga? Attachment and aversion, and clinging to life is the 5th. Yoga wants to warn against that too. Let's look at the actual nidanas themselves. The first is just the same as in yoga, avidya. We say father of yoga probably lived 600-700 years after Lord Buddha, so yoga is very influenced by Buddhism, and I'm sure Christ was too if he went to India, because Buddha would have been 500 years, 50 years old about that time. And so all of these, and Buddha, of course, influenced by Buddhism, influenced by Hinayana path and the Arhats, and by Samkhya before that, the 24 cosmic principles. So much of India's line of succession is just as passing the torch from teacher to disciple without there being any religion in the way. It's all a matter of one religion with many paths. Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vedanti. Imagine it. It's not like you want to all of a sudden convert, and then you have your parents in the way, or you have a wife who's another religion and she has to convert to you. None of that was in the way. It was all one religion, and you practiced yoga, or you followed the Vedic way, or you followed Tantra, or you were a Samkhya yogi. There was nothing in the way there. It was, in fact, they all connected to each other. You used one to help understand the other. There was all these barriers were not there. Talk about nonsense. That's nonsense. So we can look to India for that wide open path. Mother of all religions, they call her. So this avidya is there in all the systems, in Vedanta and Yoga. Failure to affirm the suffering-ridden nature of existence and renounce it is how Buddha put it. That's the first noble truth you may have recognized. So suffering is. And if you fail to affirm that suffering is, if you think that the world's your oyster, or God's a good being, like you're seeing written on the church, then you haven't understood God yet. God's beyond good and bad. And what you've got here is a mind that's full of good and bad, a collective mind that's full of good and bad and mixed, and a cosmic mind that's full of good. So you have to see these at their respective levels, understand them, and leave God out of the quotient, and rise to that later as you work your way through this cosmological process, dissolving the mind stream within you. What you don't want to do is condition the present existence, because some scars are there. Mental impressions, subtle deposits from physical, verbal, and psychological actions form in the mind. And we see that in people that we're trying to rid them of those kinds of things, so that they can at least get back to square one and start with an open slate, they say. You see, if you were born with a clean slate, then you wouldn't have a lot of these writings written on the background of your mind. Your baby would come to you in a more fine and fettle shape than with all these some scars that you're going to have to see as it grows up and wonder where they came from. Why was it so much wiser than you? Why was it so much more deluded than you? Why was it having all these problems? Why did it have very little problems and moved along easily? All the different variations and admixtures of those were in that young child that you thought was a clean slate. But a clean slate would be someone like the birth of an avatar, Ram, as a young baby. Ram Lal, I'll sing you some songs about him. You see, he's beautiful songs about Ram Lal and about Ram. Etani vinati raghunandan se dukha dandva hamara pitauji. Etani vinati raghunandan se dukha dandva hamara pitauji. 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 Etani vinati raghunandan se. My prayer to thee, O Raghunanda, is that you cause my mind to quit seeing duality. How's that for the first lines of a song? What's your prayer? May I cease seeing duality everywhere. I just want to see the one Brahman. That's what Swami Shardananda said to Sri Ramakrishna when he was a young boy, teenager. Oh Shard, I'm about to leave the body. I've given everything to the other young boys, but you've never asked for anything. What do you want? I want to see God in everything. Oh, that's the last word in spiritual life on this earth. I'll wait. He says, I'll wait. He wasn't going to take anything less than that. Like Nachiketas was not going to take anything less from the Lord of Death than what's beyond death, you see. This is a resolute soul. I mean, just turn the page. Namma japane kyun chordiya Ramana. Japane kyun chordiya Rama. Namma japane kyun chordiya Krodana chora Jyotana Chora, Krodana Chora, Jyotana Chora, Satavatane Kyun Chordiya Rama, Lama Japane Kyun Chordiya. And I could keep flipping. These are all the section of my songbook that are all Ram bhajans. So that is, O mind, why have you given up chanting the holy name of Ram? When you should be renouncing your anger, deceit, lust, greed, envy, you have given up instead the Lord. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with this picture? You see? So song after song about the great Ram. From the time he was a baby, Ramlal, just like Krishna was a baby, Gopala, all the way up through his teen years when he left the palace like Lord Buddha did and saw suffering and became dejected and then got counseled by Lord Vashishta and gave the great discourse of divine discontent, I call it, to the whole court in front of his father about reading the riot act about everything that was bothering him in the world, everything that bothers us. And after that discourse, how the beings of that realm, one of those higher realms, you see, that is Bhuvarloka, came out and showered flowers on the whole king's assembly. You see, out of the ethers, flowers started falling. And these beings knew that the Siddhas and the Munis were just right above them. And they said, where are you? So they came down in form right in front of it. Everyone hugged each other and saluted each other. Why are you here? Why did you transcend the realm down to Burloka? And they said, because Ram gave such a fine discourse. And we heard it echoing all the way up to the Bhuvarloka. And when we heard it, we were so engaged in pleasures in heaven that it made us ashamed. And we had to come down here and congratulate him for waking us up. So, a song, a discourse, a great doubt. Remember, in our Zen retreat, great doubt. Not just a single doubt, mind you, but a mass of doubts about the whole shooting match. You see, maybe the whole thing's a sankalpa. And I have to penetrate through it. So, some beautiful songs about Ram. And beautiful because the same being really is Lord Buddha, I think. There's not one avatar that comes once or many avatars that come many times. There's one avatar that comes many times. So before Buddha, there was Ram, and he left the palace and saw suffering, and thousands of years later, Buddha was in a palace, left the palace and saw suffering. So many correlations can be drawn straight across. Buddha, born in Kapilavastu, Kapila being the Lord of Samkhya Yoga who lived way back and gave us the 24 cosmic principles. Buddha studied Samkhya Yoga. He might as well have studied his own philosophy when he studied Samkhya Yoga. He took 2 Samkhya teachers, learned it, and then went to the woods to become an ascetic. Practiced asceticism and said, that's not the way, and then sat under the Bo tree for 45 days and got free of his ancestors and transmigration. So all the way along this long hallway of time, you could just see one presence there, one presence. It's formless, yes, but it takes forms, and those forms that it takes that are most profound are the Rams and Vashishtas and Krishnas and Buddhas and Christs and Mohammeds. And you're seeing one soul there manifest itself in different ages with different clothing, as it were, to match the needs and beings of the time. Those beings who don't listen fall into this chain of rebirth. See, so that was samskaras, wouldn't it? You see, if we have samskaras if we have samskaras in our mind for Ram, and that's called very positive samskara, or for Christ, you see. And that's where you get Vaishnavism and Christianity and Buddhism, is you have samskaras in your mind of those great souls. You were with them, or you were with some of their great teachers, the beings they left behind. And that got deep into you, and now you can't help but come and learn the Dharma. When I hear the teachings, the precious teachings of the Dharma, I cannot help but give it to others. When samsaric death comes, I will have no regrets. Who said that? Milarepa. You were listening to it in your car 2 nights ago. When samsaric death comes, I will have no regrets. In other words, this is an illumined soul singing about his experiences in samsara and then after samsara, after he got out of it. So those are mental impressions form. These two, avidya, ignorance, root ignorance, and mental impressions in your mind that are subtle deposits from physical, verbal, and psychological actions. Thought is father to the deed, so this is one package here. If you're living in that rut, of that kind of worldly talk, or worse, low-grade mantras as we call them, then that's digging a rut deep in your mind that you can't help but follow later. Now, if you get into the conditioning of those, then it becomes really dense. You're wrapping the chain around you tighter. Here's where the word vijnana takes a completely different definition for the Buddhists than it does for the Vedantists. Vijnana is a very high thing in Vedanta, and it's actually, in some schools of Buddhism, left in its high position. But here, they call it relative consciousness. Awareness gets crystallized by previous life experiences and enters the womb. We're already thinking back to Manas and Shukra, right? And those 2 graphs we saw of how beings fall into that relative existence in cycles. The 4th link is namarupa, name and form. A fresh body is formulated based upon past impulses and impressions. Some scars are still at work there, but the person doesn't know about it yet. Doesn't know why he acts the way he does, and why he thinks the way he does, and why he thinks he's who he is when he's really something completely different. And he's putting on masks and faces and sublations and overlays and false superimpositions and causing more layers instead of stripping them away. And name and form becomes to believe in them. Sri Ramakrishna said, the more lives you live in samsara, the more you begin to believe that the worlds of name and form are real. Now you can see the condition of people out there by that simple statement. The more lives you live in samsara, the more that you begin to come to see the worlds of name and form as real. And people think this is it, right? This is it. Body, name, form, world. This is it. No more. And that's not a bad thing if you take advantage of it as if it were your only life. I mean, in that way I would agree with the Christians. Yes, use this as your only life. But if that's all she wrote, then you don't know about the Divine Mother writing in her Book of Destiny for hundreds, thousands of lives before you took this body. As Holy Mother said. And you don't know also what she wrote she can erase. You just go to her and surrender to her and watch how quickly those karmas get erased from the Book of Destiny. One lifetime of Buddha, you see, but here they're talking about it might take you 3 lifetimes to get out of this once you recognize you're in it. What's next? The 5th link, Shadayatana. It's the 6th basis. The 6 bases, experiences ranging from exposure to the realms of the senses, develops more karma. So you have these 6 bases and these 3 unwholesome roots, ankusha and hatred and desire and those kinds of things. It's sort of like our 6 passions and 8 fetters in Vedanta. So these condition the present existence further. So you can see this whole level, length 3 through 5, is about crystallized awareness, attachment to name and form, and then the experiences that come when you get attached to name and form as if it were the only reality. Then your pleasures become real, your pains become real. And now you start looking for solutions. But remedies and solutions never affect the void, illumined being. You see? There's no no cause for diseases. There's no remedies to disease in that one illumined being. So that's the Buddha nature that's behind all of this, you see. You're going through this as if it were a kind of sankalpa, a kind of, this is your own King Swota's sankalpa city. This is King Dick and Queen Jane's sankalpa city, you see. Not nearly so rich, and you're believing every link of it to be reality. But the void illumined being never suffers from causes, remedies, and effects. It's always pure, always pure. Sparsha comes next. Intermingling with the world, its peoples, and its objects contributes to karmic conditioning. So contact and relations further condition this. The world is a great pit. Your relatives are vipers inside. That's how Ramakrishna put that. Some of them are good vipers. Some of them are bad vipers. Some of them are mixed vipers. But nonetheless, contact with them makes you believe further in the reality of the name and form, or in the reality of heaven and earth, of relatives and humans exchanging place. And you're not even clear about that. You think your relatives died and went away forever and you just dream about them and that's it? You're not even clear about that. Those two little levels of existence, ancestor, human, ancestor, human, ancestor, human. You can't even admit that there's a reincarnation process going on. You see, that's how far away you are from relative truth, what to speak of absolute truth. Contact and relations further conditioning the present existence. Then next, Vedana. Not Vedanta. Here we go into the prisons. The guard is there, you see, at the prison. We say, would you call out the inmates on the microphone in the yard for Vedanta? And they say, vendetta, vendetta, call out for vendetta. See, oh no, it's Vedanta. So here, don't make a mistake here. It's Vedana, sensation, it means. Continual and repeated stimulation of body and senses adds further conditioning. So contact with beings after falling under the influence of the 6 bases, after believing name and form to be real, after your consciousness got crystallized around life experiences and entered the womb, all in the house that Jack built. See, the samsaric house that Jack built. So now, only thing left is craving and desire, tushna, the final link there. It's just the kind of transitional link is craving desire. Desire for further contact of the senses with objects arises in order to gain satisfaction. Camel dies with the desire for thorny bushes still in its mind, so it becomes a camel with camel parents so it can get more taste of thorny bushes, as Ramakrishna says. So that's why there's so many camels always born, and so many cows and so many horses. They get the taste for that, and they get conditioned by their camel brethren, and they love the desert, they love thorny bushes, and they store up water in their humps and so forth, you see. And finally they just enter a society of camels. Trees are the same way. Trees' desires are in the seeds. It wants to become a tree again. So it puts out as many seeds as it can. These are what you see by looking at a tree. Number one, you look at a tree and you see that's an illusion tree. It's the real tree is a swirling particle tree. I can't see that with these eyes. But the essence tree is the Buddha nature tree. So first lesson of tree. Second lesson of tree. Oh, it's always producing seeds. That means it wants to desire to propitiate itself, you see. Trees by the thousands, camels by the thousands, cows by the thousands in constant rounds. And then you get to the human species, who should know better. Can stop that process at any time. But you're going to have to snap these links of this chain. Now you get to the fruits and effects of the present existence. They are upadana, attachment, that is selfish clinging to sense life, enmeshes the mind deeper in embodied existence. Selfish clinging, it was one of Lex Ixon, our founder's favorite expressions. Only he called it selfish grasping. the ego with nails like winnowing hooks, grasping on everything, you see, not letting it go. Demonic grasping. And then also bhava, a new birth happens. Due to the decay of the old body, the desire for a new body arises. And I was saying in the first half, that can happen in many ways. It can take 100 years, or it can take a year, or you can get a new body before you leave the old one, if you're really into that, bound by that chain. The inchworm is just a chain of other inchworms, you see, marching along behind it. So she said, illumined souls are a different case, you see. Illumined souls, she says, only those who belong to a high spiritual category can be renunciates and gain liberation from all kinds of fetters. I bless you so that you may attain liberation in this life. Birth and death are extremely painful. May you not suffer from them anymore. All people except highly advanced souls live in the spirit body for a year. So we're talking about souls who are bodhisattvas. Then they're going to choose the time of their coming. Let's see, Dalai Lama, 14 lifetimes. How long does he wait between each lifetime? Let's look back and see when he was born and when he passed from his last existence, and we'll get an idea of what an illumined soul, how long it waits before it projects its next body, before it finds its next parents consciously. Or let's instead look at somebody like the inchworm who just wants to grasp onto the body before its last one's even over. Some part of it knows, I can't enjoy through this withered old form anymore. The senses, the vital energy is all leaked out of the senses, so I'm going to have a new body. So somewhere inside of them, even if they don't intellectually believe in rebirth, they're working towards it unconsciously. And others, a year off. I think I'll take a year off from embodiment. So then come back in various conditions. That's the Nidanas 8 through 10. Those are the fruits of the present existence. Now, the future existence is what? Based on jati, rebirth. Remember, one of the 2 or 3 greatest of all axioms, talk about 3 great pillars, in Vedanta is ajati. And here they're talking about jati. See, so ajati, the state of those who realize that they're never born and never die. Ajati means birthless. Talked about by Vashishta to Krishna, onward forward to Buddha. Now it's mentioned here, jati, rebirth. Passage from birth to death occurs under karmic circumstances, resulting in another body. It's really the ego soul that's doing that, you see. The Supreme Soul stands free from that. So any contention between Buddhism and Vedanta is none necessary, you see. It's the ego that's going from birth to death and death to birth. The ego-mind complex. The soul never does that. Atman, Buddha nature. It stands back as the witness. And if it does do it, it does it apparently. That is, the conscious beings who project, they're doing it apparently, right? Not actually. And when they're in the body, they know they're unborn and undying. Like Swami Sheshananda. See, beings like that, our teacher. You had to be around him for a while before you figured that out, you see. What state is he living in? I want that. So jati, rebirth, and then jara maranam, old age and death. After life and passage from the new body, life gets perpetuated in yet another body. So there you have what Buddha called samsara. And his way of finding a way out of it, sitting on the river banks and letting the river go. Till finally you see the same thing go by again. And when you were in the river, you could never see the same thing go by again, so you didn't know you were circulating contacts, and desires, and so forth. But you got out on the banks, and you finally saw, oh, I see my predicament now. I think I will give it up. I will renounce it outright. So a good look at the Buddhist view of birth and death. More informational, Vashishta's way, more through stories, itihasa. And of course, Sri Sharda more from the standpoint of her own direct meditations. And she saw people coming from birth to death and death to birth. I was with Kalda Rinpoche for a while once, and he gave that story of his youth. He said, I had many farm animals when I was where I grew up, and I was very kind to them and fed them and petted them and talked to them. But that was when he was just a teenager. Now he was telling me this when he was in his 80s. He said, that's a long time. That's 50, 60, 70 years later. He's saying, when I began teaching, then I saw some of these farm animals coming back to me as my students. The audience there was silent, pin drop, just like you just were. But nonetheless, something to consider, I think if you take this too literally, like I've often said recently, and I was saying in that prison class the other night, we take the wrong things literally. We should be taking other things literally and these things symbolically. The way to take this is that the soul is never born, but it can dream itself as anything. And so, yes, you can dream yourself a moth, a cow, a camel. You can have 10 months of a human birth and die as a baby. People go, how horrible. But Mathur Babu asked Ramakrishna to be born again as his child. And Ramakrishna didn't say anything, but after the master passed, Mathur and his wife had a little baby. Girish, not Mathur Babu, Girish Chandra Ghosh, had a little baby with his wife and thought that was Ramakrishna. And so Ramakrishna, that baby lived a few months and passed. So he filled his promise to Girish. So is that such a tragedy? The unborn is always unborn and simply takes a form and gives it up. In the case of a lumen soul, no problem, as they say in India. No problem. But in the case of an unillumined soul, big problem. You see. Many problems, in fact. So there I've put up those 3 or 4 charts on rebirth, because these 4 slokas I've mentioned in the Shvetashvatara Upanishad have come down from the level of non-dualism and begin to talk about samsara and the cycles of rebirth in ignorance. That leads us to the final sloka, and then Portland will have finished after a couple years of this. The 5 chapters of this Upanishad, and have reached the final chapter, chapter 6. So the last sloka says this: that supreme divinity who created both life and matter, who is the source of all arts and sciences, who can be intuited by a pure and devoted mind, realizing that the blissful and incorporeal and the nameless, one is freed from further embodiment. So summates it nicely: to get out of the birth and death and ignorance. The incorporeal and the nameless one. And this has to be a pure mind and devoted mind that realizes this. And realizes that being who is the master of all arts and sciences. So I have here written down the idea of that master of all arts and sciences, Sri Saraswati, and also Lord Brahma, the great projector. So that's one chart we're looking at. And the other chart to see is that Trinity and the Mother and Om and everything that exists in the realm of formless and the realm of the formed. So take a gander at those 2 charts for the final 15 minutes or so as we inspect what the Upanishad is saying in its sloka. It's the master and the source of all arts and sciences, and it created life and matter. This one on our left is probably the one to go through in this case. If I can find it here amongst my charts. Lord Brahma's universal projection. The Brahma Upanishad says nicely, Under him was imparted the supreme wisdom of Brahman. He is Atman and he is Prana. He represents both life and death of the gods. He controls them and the jivas, embodied beings, through his prana, which belongs to the nadis, the nerves. In dreamless sleep they pass through that state into their own abode, like a falcon piercing the sky to rest in its own nest. Beautiful combination of art there, isn't it? Art and matter and spirituality, and some very important facts that the gods and goddesses themselves come out of the Trinity and dissolve back into the Trinity. So the saying we always do is the humans are looking to the ancestors and praying, and ancestors are looking deeper into the celestials, the angels, and praying, and the angels are looking deeper into the gods and goddesses and praying. The gods and goddesses are looking into the Trinity to pray. So anytime any one of those beings wants to transcend its station, it has to look to that level of consciousness that is more subtle than it. Otherwise it tends to go out and fall and go or gravitate between two, like humans and ancestors, human and ancestors. Or like we were talking about the munis coming out of the the siddhas and munis coming out of the ethers. They're going to have to meditate deeper beyond occult powers and beyond heavenly existence to get to a place that is not going to pull them down to earth again. When you see a so-called great being here, it was probably a god or a goddess or a demigod in some other realm, and then it had to come down to earth. Like Vivekananda says this point blank, that the gods are just big men and women, and they have to return to earth in order to become human so they can transcend being gods and goddesses. So it's from the human station that you're not fixed in one particular realm, unless, of course, you fall into samsaric life, Mayic existence. But from here you can gain your enlightenment in one lifetime, snap the chains of birth and death. Kandana Baba Bandhana is the great arati hymn of Vivekananda says, that's sung in the Belar Mat and so forth at the evening arati. O snapper of this world's chains. So if you can do that, then you may transcend these dualities, ancestor, human, demigods, gods. What Buddha wanted to do when he got free. Well, there you see transcendent reality has to be always the backdrop for everything that happens. This is a sort of three-world representation of the 14 worlds we saw earlier in the chart back here, right? The 7 patalas, hell realms, and the 7 life heavens. You could put them in the terms of the ancient Vedic way that said just Tiryan Marga, path of lower births, and Pitriyana, path of the fathers. That's ancestors and humans back and forth. This is falling into lower births. Or Devayana, the path of the gods, which would tend to worship the Trinity. There's so much light there that they can't help but knowing where that light comes from. So they're seeking darshan with Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva all the time. Even beings here on earth are doing that. We have Shaivites seek Shiva's grace, and Vaishnavas seek Krishna's grace, and Vishnu's grace, and so forth. So these ideals, chosen ideals, are there for all people, and in whatever tradition as well. The Christians would seek the Son of the Father, for instance. So this is a way it's put there, you see, and they call this his 4 states and his 4 seats. That's Lord Brahma, the great creator. He's the cosmic mind, you could call him, cosmic mind. So here you see Turiya, or Mahavishnu, his head. Deep sleep, where the soul abides, the Purusha, is his throat. Dream is his heart, and waking is his navel. So there you have the 4 states of consciousness of a human being. The jiva is waking. When he dreams, he's working with the prana. When he's in deep sleep, he's seeing himself, but he doesn't know it yet. And when he's in transcendent, he's with the great Lord, Mahavishnu, which is beyond Vishnu. Mahavishnu would be consummate with Brahman of the Vedanta. Not Brahma, this is Brahma, but Brahman. And so you have to know the difference between transcendent reality and its first form. That's just the Trinity. All good things comes in threes, you see. All questionable things come in twos. Potentially dangerous things. So let's see the quote from Brahma Upanishad. In the waking state he is Brahma, in the dreaming state he is Vishnu, in the deep sleep state he is Shiva or Rudra, and in the fourth state he is one, he is the supremely indestructible one. That's from Lord Brahma's own Upanishad, Brahma Upanishad, which is not one of the major ones. You'll have to search for it, but I can give you copies of it if you like it. So as we follow the last sloka of chapter 5, in which said, remember, that supreme divinity who created both life and matter has to be Brahma, not Brahman, because Brahman does not create, it's transcendent, who is the source of all arts and sciences, music, art, poetry, so forth, through his Shakti, Saraswati, who can be intuited by a pure and devoted mind, that heavenly aspiring mind that is going beyond deep sleep into samadhi or into higher meditation. Realizing that one, the blissful, the incorporeal, and the nameless, one is freed from further embodiment. So then again we're talking about by stages the mind is enlightened. And it's better to take a successions of lives that free you. That is, if you realize the 12 links here, you see, and get yourself free, even if it's in 3 lifetimes, that's much better than embroiling yourself into a series of lifetimes where you never know the truth. So any of these ways that you want to use, like for instance, if you use the mother, if you go to her, look at some of the beautiful things her Upanishad says. This is the Saraswati Rahasya Upanishad. Rahasya means secret. It's her secret teaching. Dearest mother, greatest goddess, Saraswati, female swan among the cluster, before the faces of the four-faced God, that's Brahma, may the all-white Saraswati sport forever in my mind. Spouse of Brahma, whose thick tresses deck the crescent moon, thou art the stream of nectar that extinguishes samsara's heat. This curtain of nescience that flows off of her, as we talk about, is thick. You see, in the deep sleep state, thickens in dreaming state, thickens in waking state, till we don't know the formless Brahman, Allah, Almighty Father, Buddha nature. We don't know it anymore. So this curtain of nescience also there, but meditating on her, then her thick tresses reveal the clear white moon of enlightenment. Buddha has many flowers and many moons, as we saw in the Zen retreat, you see. So these are all insights and realizations that he's using to ward off the arrows of hateful beings, vengeful beings, disbelievers. And he's, in all his compassion, taking them all in as one divine family, trying to enlighten them, or set them on the path to enlightenment anyway. If we look a little bit more about her, you can see she rides the swan, and she is being shining and loving, which means Sat Chitananda, as Sat being, Chit shining, intelligence, loving, Ananda or bliss. So she is the Sat Chitananda there herself. And the other side of her is the world. The peacock is behind her, the swan is in front of her. So the peacock signals the world of name and form with all its glitter and attraction, and its pride. Peacock's very vain. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, it's proud of its colors, but it walks in its own excrement. Mm-hmm. So, get thee behind me. See, Saraswati has done that with the world, and that's name and form. You can see how name and form are a problem, right? They can be a link in your seasoning of your lifetimes, conditioning of your lifetimes. over here, another thing about her. 5 factors are there in her: being, shining, loving, form, and name. The first 3 pertain to Brahman. The 2 others constitute the world. Leave aside the last 2 and be intent on the former 3. Whether inside or out, practice concentration. So she's the mother of rapt concentration. Saraswati herself. This, of course, is Sri Sharda Devi, the recent incarnation of Saraswati. Sri Ramakrishna named her. And we found this beautiful image in India when we were there less than a year ago. That is, somebody had taken Sharda herself and given her a veena and a peacock and everything. The mother of arts and wisdom herself, and the great mother of the mantra. Now, only 2 more things to say, and then we can bring our class to a close. These final quotes. Only those who get attached to pleasure do work for the sake of fruit. Though really the master of senses, they become bound and take various forms, wandering constantly along the 3 pathways as a result. They can never get to transcendent reality. What is transcendent reality according to the Vedas and Upanishads? There, neither do worlds exist or not exist. Neither do the Vedas and the gods exist or not exist. Neither does the father and mother exist nor not exist. Only the highest Brahman shines there. That's how they specify it. It sounds very Buddhist-like, very Zen-like, very non-dual, very Advaitic. It's not that everything goes away there, but there's nothing there. So you have to contrast it, 2 black rocks against each other and smash them both, and what's left over, that's Brahman. So you're going to have to go beyond the idea of form and formlessness in highest meditation, and it must be known. That was one of the more pregnant statements here in these final 5 slokas we have taken today. It is the soul's, that is, the individual soul is as subtle as a hairpoint, divided and subdivided hundreds of times. It is potentially infinite. It has to be known. So when it is known, that is where knower, known, and knowledge all dissolve into one thing. There is Brahman. There shines Brahman. The essence of all that everyone seeks, knowingly or unknowingly, is from the Upanishads. Now we will bring it to a close with a chant, and then meet again tomorrow at the same time for 3 hours of excursion into chapter 6, the final chapter of Shvetashvatara Upanishad. Om Sato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Joytir Gamaya Mrichorma Amritam Gamaya Abira Bira Mayeti Rudrayate Dakshinamukam Denamam Pahinicham Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from darkness to light, from lower truth to higher truth, from the unreal to the real, from the illusion of death to eternal life. Reach us through and through, O Lord and Mother, with thy sweet and benign presence. Om, peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om.